Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on BPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHMWPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Liz Pencotti of the Groundwork Collaborative to discuss what federal job cuts could mean to Philadelphia. Mark Steyer, the executive director of the Pennsylvania Policy Center, will share with us his thoughts on the Tax Reform Commission. And Vanessa Maria Graber will provide an update on what's happening with immigration in the city. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing okay. It's been a long week already.
Yeah, it's only Wednesday. That kind of sucks.
Yep. And a lot going on. So what we're going to do is get started with our interview with Liz Pencotti. All right, Liz Pencotti, Managing Director of Groundwork. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what Groundwork does?
Yes, Groundwork is a think tank and policy advocacy shop here in Washington, D.C. We really focus on kind of centering the people who power our economy rather than big corporate actors or government officials who are trying to break it.
Very appropriate for this time for sure. So some information that you had sent us. The Philly metro area has 52,000 federal workers, and Philadelphia itself has 14,000. I was in a city council finance committee hearing last week where they said that federal workers contribute about $100 million to the city each year in our wage tax. What would a wholesale elimination of these positions mean to the city and the region?
So these account for about 2% of employment, which sounds really small, but if you think about kind of the national unemployment rate of 4%, that would be a 50% increase. So decently large. This is not necessarily the wide-scale layoffs that we saw at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. We're not looking at, a massive recession for the kind of first order effects, so those who are directly implicated. But there's a second layer that are people who are not directly employed by the federal government, but are supported by federal grants, folks at the Philly Art Museum, people at the hospitals around town, kind of community development organizations. Those rely on federal funding, and to the extent we are seeing these layoffs coupled with other freezes on federal funding, it's likely that those could be affected. In addition, as you said, $100 million in wage taxes is not nothing. That could blow a decent sized hole in city and state revenue. And beyond the revenue effects, those folks go out to lunch when they go to the office, they spend money at grocery stores in their community, they send their kids to daycare. And so if those families are pulling back on consumer spending, you can have a broader effect on the macroeconomy.
And when we talk about some of these forward-facing agencies that deal with the public all the time, if we start to see some of these cuts, what does it mean for vulnerable people who need these vital services?
I think the big one to focus on, just given the time of year, is there were 400 layoffs at IRS offices in Philadelphia in the middle of tax filing season. People have about 6 more weeks to get their tax returns in. That's families trying to claim the child tax credit. That's small businesses trying to file for their tax returns. Those workers being laid off will result in longer wait times, worse customer service, people not being able to access the tax benefits and tax returns that they're entitled to, or, making a mistake on their tax returns that is costly for them to fix. That's one. I think VA hospitals, veterans hospitals are another place where these layoffs really do affect real people. I saw, and it is not Philly specific, but in Madison, Wisconsin, the wait time for a cancer screening at the VA went from 23 days to 29 days in just 1 week of these layoffs and budget cuts. So we really are starting to see these effects. And from what I've heard, there's talk of them speeding up, not slowing down.
So I've read the rationale for why the Trump-Musk administration wants to do this. But like this destruction of the administrative state, I think is really extremely lucrative for these people, particularly Musk. Can you discuss maybe why this is happening and what the loss of these services will do to Americans all over the country?
I think you're right about the kind of lucrative aspect of this. I think there's two probably big aims for Elon Musk. One, data is the new oil, and having his paws on all of the data infrastructure throughout the federal government. That's Medicare claims for people going to hospitals. That's your tax returns if you've ever filed one. That's, veterans' medical records at the VA. That's small business applications. It's patent applications. Elon Musk and his companies now have access to all of that information so that they can find out more about their competitors. They can find out more about their customers. It is really pervasive, kind of their grasp on the federal government and the information that it holds. In addition, all of these cuts really do have effects on real people. It means that your grandma won't get her Social Security check. It means that your uncle can't get his cancer screening at the Veterans Administration. It means you can't get your child tax credit in a timely fashion. And their goal here really is to say the government is bad, break it, and then say it's worse, and blame it on the government, not themselves. While they're cutting all of these funding and services, Elon Musk's companies are also reaping the benefits. There's been several new contracts awarded. The FAA, who controls flight safety in the country, has announced that they're upgrading their IT systems, not with the contract with Verizon that was signed 2 years ago, but now with a new contract for Elon Musk's Starlink. And so he has a lot to gain from contracts to his new companies, be it his, Starlink internet ventures, his electric vehicle company, Tesla, his space company, SpaceX, or even his new AI ventures or consumer payment ventures, XMoney and Grok AI. I think, there's a real possibility here that the ultimate goal is to automate the federal government, fire all of its workers, automate it, and give one big contract to Grok AI to run the Social Security Administration. I think it remains to be seen exactly what his, goals are here, but it's pretty clear he wants to capture the government for his gain.
Yeah, I mean, that's been my take on this
pretty cheap price tag for it, $300 million in, campaign contributions, and you get $7 trillion worth of federal expenditures at your disposal.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening here. So we're starting to see Republicans being held accountable to their constituents in their home districts. Do you think people are starting to realize what's really going on here?
I think, for all the talk of government efficiency, these cuts are hitting people really fast. They say, the government is slow and takes too long to do anything. But in fact, real people see the benefits of the federal government in their everyday lives. It means that their Social Security direct deposits hit their accounts on the first of the month. It means their food stamps get to their EBT cards in a timely fashion. And therefore, when you start to break it, it hits people's pocketbooks really quickly. And so you're seeing layoffs at worker and consumer protection agencies already, leaving workers and consumers unprotected from kind of bad corporate actors. They've announced that they're going to close half the Social Security Administration field offices in the country. That would affect the 72 million older Americans and people with disabilities who rely on those benefits. I think, I saw a clip of a couple of town halls of Republican congressmen and senators around the country. Roger Marshall was back home in Kansas last week and was booed out and had to leave because he couldn't face the criticism. And so I find that encouraging that people are speaking out, but it ultimately is really painful to see the effects of these cuts, funding freezes, and general chaos, even if it doesn't actually result in, a layoff for someone or a service you rely on.
So part of my job, I feel like, is trying to explain to people what's happening. That's why we're talking to you. That's why we've spoken to a lot of different people about this. Usually we focus on just Philadelphia local government and consumer affairs. I feel like half my job now is trying to deal with what's happening at the federal level and trying to explain to people what's going on and how that's going to impact Philadelphia, which again is why we're so grateful to you being able to show us that. But how do you explain this to people, and I don't know if this is possible, who believe that these cuts are essential and that these are the right things to be doing? How do you have that conversation with somebody?
There is no doubt that there are improvements to be made in efficiency and efficacy of the federal government. There is plenty of fat to be trimmed. We are not talking about fat being trimmed here. We are talking about a blow up of the largest employer in this country, the largest checkbook in this country, and not for the purpose of making anything more efficient. I'm not sure that requiring federal employees to send 5 bullet points about what they did last week and having some 19-year-olds look at it is really improving efficiency or efficacy anywhere. It is just about destroying it. And so certainly I think, policymakers and elected officials on both sides of the aisle need to take a serious look at inefficiencies, waste, fraud, and abuse in this in our spending. There are in fact people who do that. The Consumer Protection Financial Bureau has returned $21 billion since its inception after the Great Recession financial collapse in the late 2000s. That agency was shut down. It was in fact making things more efficient and better for consumers when they spend money, when they take out student loans, et cetera. There are enforcers at the Center for Medicaid and Medicare who go after fraud and abuse for those systems. They have let go of those workers. At the IRS, they have either let them go or detailed them to the border, the cops that make sure that wealthy tax cheats pay their taxes. So in the name of efficiency, they are in fact firing or blowing up the workers and systems that improve or reduce waste, fraud, and abuse in our federal expenditures. I think, you can't simply take them at their word, especially when Elon Musk, the world's richest man, is controlling all of this and using this newfound power that he has to give himself and his companies payouts.
All right, I'd like to bring you Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Of course.
Now, when I look at the government cuts, I look at it from the standpoint of the civil rights movement. The middle class and marginalized communities was created through people being able to work for the government. And I don't hear that being talked about a whole lot. And yet it affects a whole lot of people. Is that because, we're just afraid to tackle the topic, or has anyone thought about that?
I think that's right. I think, the federal government it is the country's largest employer, and in many cases, it has been sort of an economic stabilizer for different people or different communities, whether that be, Social Security field offices or postal service offices have. For many communities, I grew up in Texas in the South. This is where Black and brown workers were able to find employment before corporations would hire them. It's also the largest employer of veterans in this country. It was the way, federal hiring practices was the way we said, oh, we really screwed over an entire group of people, and this is how we will fix it. We will give them a good union job with a solid paycheck and a pension. And now that's being destroyed. And they are, I don't know, in the first few days of the Trump administration, Elon Musk and President Trump said, we want people to come work for the federal government, spend a couple years here, and then go out and work for the private sector. Our goal is to put them back into the private sector. These, in large part, are workers who the private sector has turned their back on, and people who want to do good, who want to make our communities better and serve the mission of the federal government, deliver benefits to people and communities. And so I think it is something they're dancing around. I used to work for Senator Sanders in the United States Senate. And there is a very large government contract to a company called Maximus, which runs the call centers for the Affordable Care Act and for Medicaid and Medicare. It's about 50,000 largely Black female workers in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama. And it's a federal contract. They are under executive orders from President Biden, guaranteed a minimum wage of at least $15 an hour. They are guaranteed sick leave. They are guaranteed parental leave. These are good jobs. They are not directly employed by the federal government, but they not only provide vital services and information to people trying to access healthcare, but they do lift up communities because they employ these workers. And Elon Musk and President Trump have their sights set on gutting these, not only for the people who rely on those workers, but also for the workers who rely on those jobs.
Now, when you look at everything that's going on with the government, what I've been thinking in my head is whoever becomes president next is going to spend easily the first 2 or 3 years of their term rebuilding everything that has been torn down, which has been a lot. Is that possible even? I mean, how do you make these agencies at least somewhat able to do the job that their title would suggest they're supposed to do?
So President Trump's first term did not at the speed or the extent that we're seeing now, but tore down a lot of core parts of the federal government. And in fact, President Biden had to spend his first few years reinstating a lot of those things. Some of them took longer than the first 2 or 3 years. I remember a regulation that President Trump pulled down was not reissued until the final few months of President Biden's first term. So yes, it will take a lot of time and effort. A lot of these government services run on COBOL, a coding program that hasn't been used in 30, 40 years. I used to work on unemployment insurance during the pandemic, and this was a big issue. A lot of states' unemployment insurance systems run on COBOL. My dad is 55 and knows a little bit about COBOL, and he's one of the younger folks that knows about it. There's a very real possibility that these systems, which are so fragile and relying on such outdated technology and people who understand that outdated technology, that if you fire those workers and those workers go retire or find a new private sector job, you can't necessarily pull them back. Elon Musk was in the Oval Office last week saying, we accidentally fired the Ebola workers. And he was like, we will make mistakes and we will work quickly to fix them. And, they fired the Ebola workers, the bird flu workers, the people at NOAA who put out our weather reports. Oops, and tried to claw them back. The people who keep our nuclear weapons secure and safe and tried to claw them back. They didn't have email addresses or phone numbers for some of these workers. And so they literally cannot contact them to try to get their jobs back. I think they right now have a mission of moving fast and breaking things they are.
Now, you mentioned unemployment insurance. During the pandemic, we did a lot of stories here on Hall Monitor about how people were having trouble accessing unemployment because of a combination of a lack of manpower and the systems themselves. What are you seeing in terms of unemployment now that you have especially so many federal workers that are now collecting unemployment?
So the way that federal workers access unemployment, these are directly employed by the federal government. So not contractors, not kind of those second order effects. They apply through their state agencies, and then their state agencies request reimbursement from those benefits from the federal agency those workers used to work for. That all has to happen after the person claims benefits. So even in order for these people to get that, that person's going to apply for unemployment insurance. Then the state agency is going to call the agency that they used to work for and say, hey, so-and-so just applied for unemployment. What was the term of their separation? Were they fired for cause? Were they laid off? Are they eligible for unemployment insurance? I have heard anecdotes. I haven't seen kind of widespread reporting of this, but because of the way this is all happening, agencies are saying very different things to those unemployment agencies. So federal agencies are saying, yes, that was a layoff. This person was let go for no fault of their own, and they deserve to and are eligible for unemployment insurance benefits. Some agencies are saying, well, that person wasn't doing their job. They weren't doing their job satisfactorily, and so they were let go for cause. And so they're not eligible to claim unemployment insurance benefits. The other thing you had during the pandemic was the federal government put a lot of resources to kind of expand unemployment insurance benefits, either to increase eligibility for workers who are not traditionally eligible, or to increase benefit levels, which are abhorrently low, $200-300 a week. We are not seeing that so far, and given kind of what President Trump has said about his spending priorities, which are tax cuts for billionaires, not increased services for working families, I don't suspect that we'll see increases in unemployment insurance benefits or system upgrades. And so you have the issue of, can these workers even access it? And then when they are able to access it, the benefits are really paltry compared to their federal salaries. And so I'm worried, but federal employees should know that they should apply regardless of what they think the terms of their separations are. You should apply. You apply with your state agencies. You do not apply kind of through the district. If your agency is headquartered in DC, you do not apply through the DC system. You apply where you live, and they should apply. They can appeal those decisions and say that the reduction in force was the reason for their separation, and hopefully they should all be eligible.
Now, is there any state that's handling this better than other states that we could possibly learn from? Because one thing that Pennsylvania is really good at is taking whatever bad idea someone gave them and turning it into law. Are there any states that are handling this, well, that maybe Pennsylvania could learn from?
I think it's too early to say how states are handling this particular bout of layoffs. Coming out of the COVID pandemic and kind of the real influx in unemployment insurance claims and benefits there, some states did modernize their systems. And in fact, as a result of the American Rescue Plan Act, there was about $1 billion distributed to states to make those improvements. I believe 35 or so states participated in those efforts. I'm not sure if Pennsylvania was one of them, but neighboring state New Jersey has made really excellent improvements to their unemployment insurance system over the past few years. And so I think that's a close place to look. But I think it really, for this particular issue and these particular bout of layoffs, it's too early to tell what states are doing a great job. I will say, in general, the unemployment insurance system is incredibly dated, and it does not really match our modern workforce, and benefits are extremely low. And so no one gets a gold star, but I know for a fact New Jersey has made kind of really great improvements, especially for gig workers, or increasing benefit levels over the past few years. And so that's maybe one place they can look.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us. And I'm going to give you back to my co-host, Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right. Thank you, Denise. And Liz, before we let you go, can you tell us where people can learn more about Groundwork?
Yes, the groundworkcollaborative.org and Groundwork on Elon Musk's platform X.
Mm-hmm. Well, Liz Pancati, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. We'd like to thank Liz for joining us on the program, and she'll be back with us in the future to tell us more as we follow this story and see what's going to happen next. Who knows? And
well, she was very informative. That's one thing. And one thing that she said is really very important. If you are a federal employee and you have been laid off, apply for the unemployment.
Yeah.
If for no other reason, but there are a lot of lawsuits going on right now in terms of people who were fired for no reason,
right,
that are being filed against the federal government. If you file your unemployment and your lawsuit is also filed, that proves you were discharged, and they have to say why they did it. And if you have, proof that what they're telling folks and what actually happened are two entirely different things, you win all around.
Yeah. All right. So now we'd like to bring in Lance Haver to tell us a little bit about an interview he conducted with Mark Steyer. Lance, how are you tonight?
Good evening. She was a great guest, really wonderful, a lot of information. And one of the things that I find so remarkable is that Mr. Musk, who is making these recommendations for taking a chainsaw to all of the government workers, should know, and probably does know, that when that was tried in the private industries, whether it was Sears or it was GE or any number of other businesses, that it ended up in complete disaster. The reason why we don't have Sears any longer, and the reason why we don't have GE any longer, is because these corporate executives like Mr. Musk went in with what they called the chainsaw. And that was what Mr. Musk was filmed showing, and just laid off every single worker that they could find to lay off. And of course, without thinking about it, they laid off the salespeople. They laid off the people who were bringing money into the company, and the company continued to shrink and shrink and shrink. And as the revenues fell off, these corporate executives with their chainsaws let go more workers. And as a result, these businesses were driven out of business. And not only did the workers lose, but in many cases, the consumers lost. I mean, someone of my age grew up going shopping at Sears, not just for work clothes, but for a sports jacket or a suit and a refrigerator and hand tools. And, we were we were proud to have the Sears tools. They were really well made. They were lasted forever. And now, of course, the Craftsman tools are no longer made in the United States. They still have the same name, but of course, they're not the same quality. So it's really shocking to find out that someone who should know that experience of watching corporations just take a chainsaw to their own employees and see that it doesn't work, doing the same thing to the federal government, except if Denise is right. The whole plan here is to make the government fail and get people so angry that you privatize everything, and then people like Mr. Musk end up with the contracts.
Because that's already kind of happening a little bit on the federal level. There are things that used to be government functions that now one of Elon Musk's companies has gotten the contract for. Starlink is what I'm thinking about in terms of like the air traffic control and stuff. And, I understand that basically we are being governed by some pretty greedy people who between the two of them have shown the business acumen of a cockroach. But at some point, somebody needs to be the adult, and it's probably not going to be Congress. It may be the Supreme Court, but I'm not betting on it. But at some point, somebody's going to have to step in and be the adult, and they're going to have to point to things like the stock market, which took such a precipitous drop yesterday at the announcement of all the tariffs that people were looking at their 401ks and thinking, I'm never going to be able to retire. So somebody has got to be the adult in the room. And who that is anybody's guess right now.
It affects everybody who's getting ready to retire, everybody who's trying to buy a house, who is saving to buy a house, everyone who is saving to send their kids to college. All of those people now are going to really struggle with what they were expecting for their lives. But also every city government and every county government, every state government, and every corporation that has a defined benefit pension is really in trouble because those investments are in the stock market. And Philadelphia has been really struggling to get enough money in its pension plan. Finally did, but as a result of the stock market crashing, or they like to say, we're in the correction era, it's now going to be underfunded. We'll have to see what the future brings. But the other thing that I find strange, and we're going to talk about that now, is how President Trump and Mr. Musk's plan for taxes are to lower taxes for the wealthy, for the corporations, and say it's going to grow the economy. And the Democrats in the city of Philadelphia are all horrified by that recommendation. They say, look, trickle-down economics didn't work when Reagan tried it, didn't work when Bush tried it, didn't work when Bush II tried it, it's not going to work now. But we have our own Elon Musk in the city of Philadelphia. We have Richard Vague, who gives literally tens of thousands of dollars to candidates who get elected, who then appoint him to tax review commissions where he recommends, ready, eliminating all the business taxes and rolling back the wage taxes, and then looking at the city and saying, well, we're not going to have to cut any city services because those things are going to grow jobs. And to just understand that a little bit better, we have an interview with Mark Steer, who's the executive director of the Penn Policy Center. And he's going to go into that a little bit more. And if we can play that, I think people will be surprised to see that what's being recommended for Philadelphia's budget, and the budget hearings are coming up, I know, is exactly the same thing that President Trump is recommending for the federal budget. The Democrats in the city of Philadelphia are horrified by that, but apparently don't really think the idea is bad. They only think it's bad because it's associated with Trump, because when their political patron, who's giving them money to get elected, recommends the same thing, there's no outcry. Hey, Mark, thank you for joining us this evening. Just as a full disclosure, I know Mark for many, many years. I've worked with him. I admire his work. I think he's great. But he's here today to talk about the Philadelphia Tax Review Commission. Mark, before we start talking about what it is and what they recommended, can you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm the executive director of the Penn Policy Center. We're a public policy research and advocacy organization based in Harrisburg, but we work on federal, state, and local issues. And we work on tax, safety net, education, and other issues.
Thank you. So Philadelphia has a new tax review commission report, and I say new because every so often the city sets up this tax review commission, and every so often they make recommendations. What are they talking about? Why do we need a tax review commission? And what's the basis for their thoughts?
Well, I would say every few years they make the same recommendations. And the rationale for having the commission is because people in the business community would like to see their taxes reduced. So they encourage our political leaders to get a bunch of people together, mostly again from the business community, to review Philadelphia's taxes and make some proposals. And typically those proposals are to cut business taxes and to cut wage taxes. And we've seen it again and again. And most of the time, the city may listen a little bit, but doesn't do too much because, it's the same idea proposed by George W. Bush and Donald Trump at the federal level, by Republican candidates at the state level. And the voters in Philadelphia mostly reject those people. And the voters in Philadelphia know that if we start cutting business taxes, their property taxes are going to go up. So they have to keep coming back asking for the same thing, and hopefully once again, they won't get it.
Are the business taxes a problem in the city of Philadelphia? And if they are a problem, are they a bigger problem than, let's say, the cost of real estate or the poor schools or the lack of infrastructure?
The whole Tax Reform Commission report, which just came out, is based on a series of myths. The first myth is that Philadelphia is growing slowly and losing jobs. That was true in the 20th century, but since the turn of the century, Philadelphia has been growing faster and creating more jobs than most of the cities in the Northeast, East, and the Midwest that we compare ourselves to. Philadelphia is not growing as fast as, say, Jacksonville or Phoenix, but no cities in the Northeast and the Midwest are growing as fast as cities in the South and Southwest, and that's because of national trends that have led to a shift in manufacturing and other business and population from one region to another. Philadelphia taxes have nothing to do with that. We're doing better than most of the cities in the Northeast and Midwest. The other myth is that taxes are really high. Wage and business taxes are a bit higher for the very richest Philadelphians, but not for everyone else. 70% of the businesses in Philadelphia don't actually pay the business income and receipt tax. Only the largest and most profitable companies do, and those taxes are a very, very small percentage of their cost of doing business. So it's really hard to believe they have very much impact at all. And let me make one other point, which people just don't understand. The Philadelphia BIRT, the business income receipt tax, is not a tax on businesses located in Philadelphia. It's a tax on businesses doing business in Philadelphia. So businesses in Monco that sell things or have locations in Philadelphia, they pay the BIRT. So the idea that the BIRT discourages people from locating in Philadelphia and encourages them to live in Monco is just nonsensical. There's only one exception to that, and an exception that could be fixed very easily for lawyers and accountants. But I'm not going to go into those details right now.
So Philadelphia does have some programs to help small startup businesses. And they don't really show up in the tax commission's report. The idea that the small businesses are the ones that need the help by eliminating, and they're not calling just for a reduction, but the elimination of business taxes. Does that make any sense to you?
Absolutely not. 70% businesses, any business with gross receipts of $100,000 or less, not only doesn't pay the gross receipts part of the BIRT, they don't pay the net income part of the BIRT. Again, that's something people don't know. There's a myth that Philadelphia burdens small businesses. It does not. If we eliminate the BIRT, most of the benefits are going to go to the wealthiest, largest corporations that operate in the city. It's a big giveaway to Comcast, which already got a big $30 million bonus to build one of their buildings in Philadelphia. They don't need the help.
And the Pew Charitable Trust did a review of the business taxes. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I found interesting that I've written about is Philadelphia does have a program to get businesses to start in Philadelphia. It's called Philly Jumpstart.
Yes.
And it eliminates all business taxes, every tax for startup businesses for 2 years.
Mhm.
The Pew found that there were over 3,000 businesses that didn't take advantage of that program and were paying taxes anyway. Do you think that that program would be helpful if people actually knew about it?
Yeah, Philadelphia could fix its taxes by doing what it says it does much better. Number one, it could let people know about Jumpstart program. It could let people know about a program for businesses that add new jobs. They also get a tax break. And it also could collect taxes on the businesses located outside of Philadelphia that operate in here. I don't think they do a very good job of that either. And that would level the playing field. Let me talk about one last myth. The last myth is that if we reduce taxes, we will create, hundreds of thousands of jobs. They actually hired Econsult to do a report on their proposal.
Let me stop you there. I don't know how many of our viewers know who that is.
Sure, Econsult is a economic consulting firm that businesses often hire to give them some advice about the consequences of what they do. And this time they were hired to give a report on the impact of business tax cuts. So if you look at the boldest plan they put forward, at the end of 10 years, it would increase the number of jobs in Philadelphia by 40,000. Now that may sound a lot, but we have like a million plus jobs in the city. It's a very small percentage. At the end of 10 years, we would already have grown probably another 100,000 jobs. And here's the other thing. All the economic research shows that if you cut taxes to create jobs, most of those jobs go to people from moving into Philadelphia. Of the 32 to 45,000 jobs, only 6,000 to 9,000 jobs would be created for current Philadelphians. And the cost of this is about $2 billion of lost tax revenue over 10 years. That's an extraordinary amount of money for 8,000 jobs for Philadelphians. There's so many better things we could do that would create jobs and, more importantly, reduce poverty in our city.
And we're going to talk about what the other possibilities are in a second. But
Sure.
I know in your past, you were the president of the West Mountain Area Neighbors Group. And one of the things that the commission continues to talk about is the wage tax is the reason why people leave Philadelphia. And I wanted to ask you about that. I personally don't know anyone who said to me, I'm leaving Philadelphia to go to the suburbs because the wage tax is too high. I do know in my circle a number of people who have said the schools can't get the schooling for my kids. I know a few people who say, I don't want to deal with the streets anymore, the homeless population, the crime, whatever. And a few people have said to me, I'm making so much money by selling my house now. I'm going to Delaware and I'm going to put my feet up and just have a good time.
Right.
So what do you think about?
When I was president of West Mountain Area Neighbors, I actually would look for and try to talk to people who are leaving the community because I want to know what could we do better to hold them. The only reason people ever left West Mountain Area is for the schools. No one ever mentioned taxes. We have a wage tax, but some of the suburban communities have wage taxes. It's a little lower, but the property taxes in the suburbs are so much higher than the property tax. I actually looked at a house comparable to mine in Springfield Township, across the border in Montco. The property taxes there would be 3 to 4 times what I pay right now. So the total tax burden, and Pew did a study of this too, the total tax burden for anyone living in Philadelphia is about the same as what it would be out in the suburbs. The balance of tax would be a little different. They pay less in wage tax, but they pay way more in property taxes.
And so are wage tax more progressive than property taxes, or are they roughly the same? And what I mean by progressive is, does it fall more heavily on the high earners, or does it fall more heavily on the low earners?
Wage tax is a fairly flat tax. I mean, it's the same percentage. Property tax falls more heavily on low income people, and that's partly the function of people spend less on the houses, they get richer relative to their income, and partly a function that we assess people in poor neighborhoods in different ways than we do in richer neighborhoods. There's no question to me that if we cut business taxes and wage taxes and make up for this over $200 million a year in lost revenues, by increasing property taxes or by letting property values increase so that we pay more, we're going to make our tax system more aggressive. That is, the burden of our Philadelphia taxes fall more heavily on low income and working class people than it does on the rich.
And I want to ask that one more question and talk about alternatives. Philadelphia reportedly has a relatively high number of middle income to low income homeowners. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Yes, far more than most cities. We have a lot of homeowners. And I'll tell you, one thing the city has done a very good job of is protecting them against higher property values because of gentrification. But this shift in taxes from wages to businesses to property taxes will overwhelm the safeguards the city has put in.
And that's not hidden. That's right in the report. They actually say the property taxes are too low. Is that correct?
Yes. This has been part of their theory for years, that we tax the wrong things. We tax things that can move like people, and we tax things that don't move like buildings less. That's not true in a couple of ways. Number one, buildings don't move, but they can be improved and they can deteriorate. And if you tax buildings, you will find that some of them will deteriorate because people can't afford to keep them up. The second thing is, we know from experience from nationwide tax policies that the two fastest growing cities in the country are San Francisco and Boston. Now, we don't necessarily want to emulate them because they have gentrified and hurt working people, but one thing we found is both those cities have been shifting in the direction of Philadelphia. They've been reducing taxes on property and increasing taxes on other things. And they did it because people will remember in the later part of the 20th century, there were tax revolts in California, Proposition 13, Proposition 2.5 in Boston. They were forced to keep their property taxes from going up. They're looking more like us, and they are the fastest growing cities in the country. So the idea that we should become a normal city and put more burden on property taxes and less burden on business taxes is just refuted by the historical evidence.
What could they have recommended differently, in your opinion, that would have really helped small businesses and create jobs in the city, and talk about raising people out of poverty? I just want to put a caveat in.
Right.
Philadelphia Hall Monitor no longer talks about Philadelphia being the poorest city in the United States. What we talk about is that we are an incredibly wealthy system with a very unequal distribution of wealth. So what could we do to change the wealth distribution, to create jobs, and to help people live middle-class lives in Philadelphia?
I think you're putting your finger right on the major problem with this report. They're actually looking at the wrong thing. Our biggest economic problem is that 20 to 25% of our population is poor, and that income inequality is growing. It's grown dramatically in our city over the last 20 years. And that's a moral crisis, but it's also a crisis that harms all of us. When we look at crime and violence, when we look at poor quality schools and schools that aren't successful, when we look at reduced business activity, all of those things are made worse because of poverty. When a big portion of your city is poor, they don't spend that much. If we reduce poverty, they would spend more. That would generate far more business activity than reducing the tiny amount of taxes that businesses pay. And even more importantly, their answer is wrong. They say somewhere, all right, we'll create jobs and that will reduce poverty. They misunderstand the poverty problem. If you look at the relationship between economic growth and job growth and poverty across 27 cities like I've done, you see a very small relationship. The biggest relationship is between segregation, racial segregation, economic segregation, and poverty. Entrenched poverty like we have in Philadelphia, it's not a product of a lack of jobs, but of communities that are disconnected in many ways from the dynamic sectors of our economy. There are poor schools. There's disinvestment of government, disinvestment of the private sector. There's a lack of personal connection between people living in poor communities and much wealthier communities. And that means kids growing up in those communities don't have the same opportunities to get summer jobs or internships or to learn about the path to college and path to better jobs. This disconnect didn't just happen. It was created by a series of policy choices over many, many years. Local zoning ordinances that supported segregation, restricted covenants that forced Black people migrating here to live in segregated neighborhoods, redlining, disinvestment of the government from local communities, underfunded K-12 schools, the failure to give Black-owned businesses an appropriate share of city contacts, urban renewal programs and highway programs that disrupted Black communities and reinforced segregation. That went on for many, many years, and some of it is still going on. We could reverse that if we had $2 billion over 20 years.
So let's talk about, in your opinion,
things.
what should they have recommended?
Okay. Well, should have recommended is number one, invest in workforce training to connect people in low-income communities to existing jobs that go unfilled. Providing capital to Black and brown-owned businesses and women-owned businesses that don't have access to that capital right now. Ensuring that Black and brown businesses and women-owned businesses get their fair share of city contracts. And invest in commercial corridor programs that encompass the last three strategies and also provide amenities that make these corridors more attractive. Cities all over the country, as close as Pittsburgh, are doing that. In Pittsburgh, city invested about $100 million in a community called West Liberty. That generated over $1 billion of private investment. It created 20,000 jobs. It spurred residential development. It's took a neighborhood that was in a terrible state 30 years ago and made it a much more attractive neighborhood. Dwight Evans did something like this in West Oak Lane as well, using public investment. We're just missing the boat. New York did that. When we were growing up, remember everyone talked about the South Bronx as a disaster area. South Bronx is a vibrant place now because of a series of policies like this. For 20 years, we're talking about tax cuts to big businesses as if that's a solution to poverty and solution to distressed communities, and it is not. We know what works. If we have money for a $2 billion tax cut over 10 years to the wealthiest corporations in Philadelphia, we have money to invest in our poor communities.
Thank you. And we're going to have to end the interview now, but let me just open it up a little bit. Is there anything I missed? Anything you think our viewers?
I think you got the major topics. Thanks.
Again, Dr. Stier, thank you very much for being with us this evening. And we look forward to having you back when we find out what the commission's report means to Philadelphia City Council and the mayor.
Thanks very much.
All right, Lance, thank you so much for that interview.
You're welcome. And we will send out more information about the petition that Dr. Stier is circulating.
Great. All right, now I'd like to bring in Vanessa Maria Graber on the program. Vanessa, how are you tonight?
Well, I'm hanging in there just like the rest of America.
Yep, that's the best we can do right now. So tell us what you've been keeping an eye on.
Well, there have been many updates and conversations regarding immigration in the last coming days. And last night, this was especially apparent during the State of the Union address, where the subject came up many times. And of course, President Trump reiterated his rhetoric and false narratives around the idea that criminals are entering the country and committing all of the crimes. And of course, we know that that's not true. A lot of the cases that he referred to in the State of the Union address were isolated cases that he used to demonstrate his point. And the reality is, and again, I want to underscore this because there's so much misinformation right now about this fact, is that immigrant persons in the United States are far less likely to commit crimes than American citizens, and that the majority of crimes being committed in this country are by U.S. citizens. And also that when we look at specific crimes, like rape and sexual assault, for example, which is something the president said various times those crimes are being committed by white men. And so the idea that you would scapegoat Black and brown immigrant persons and overstate these facts and use these cases to demonstrate, the need to arrest everybody and deport them is really, really a disservice to the American public, because it uses fear to scapegoat an entire community of people. And so that happened last night. Today, that was followed by some really fiery testimony that occurred today in the House Oversight Committee. And so there were 6 hours of testimony from mayors of 4 U.S. cities, who are often called sanctuary cities, testifying today, led by Republican Committee Chair Jades Comer of Kentucky. And so the mayors of New York City, Chicago, Boston, and Denver all appeared in front of Congress today, answered questions about how their city administrations are cooperating with ICE and other federal entities. And a lot of the line of questioning was trying to challenge this idea of sanctuary city, and again, perpetuating the lie that there is a huge problem with immigrant or undocumented people committing crimes in their city. And really what the mayors showed is that is actually not the case, that is misinformation, and that the incidence of crime with undocumented people represents a very, very small percentage of the total crime in their cities, and that in some of their cities crime is actually down. And so they were questioned about how police may or may not be cooperating with ICE. Oh, I think there's some typing in the background. I'm not really sure. It's pretty loud. But anyway, the mayors were asked how their police departments were or were not cooperating with ICE. And again, there was many false accusations about them breaking federal law. Of course, when these executive orders and these policies are being signed, they do so under the advisement of many different attorneys who are looking at constitutional law and trying to make sure that the cities are in fact not breaking federal laws when they sign these executive orders. And so that is what they continue to say and defend their sanctuary city policies. And what did not happen today was they did not buckle under this pressure, despite a lot of the grilling from Republican Congress members. And so it did not look the same as the showdown between the Ivy League presidents and the same House Oversight Committee that happened a few months ago, that resulted in the resigning of these some of the university presidents. And what I noticed is that the mayors were really united in calling on Congress to pass immigration reform. And so that was 6 hours of testimony. It's online. It's on C-SPAN, which is always free and available to everybody. So folks want to check out some clips for that. Definitely makes for good TV. And who was not part of that panel? Well, of course, Sherelle Parker, our city's mayor, was not on that panel, and largely because she's remained rather silent on the issue. She has not made any public statements, except again to reiterate her position that she is focused on Philadelphia being a safer, greener, cleaner city with economic opportunity for all, but has not come out and defended sanctuary city, except to say that the city's current policies will remain in place. And so it occurred to me that a lot of people might not know what sanctuary city means. That was pretty clear at the hearings today, that many of the Republican Congress members were making up definitions for sanctuary city. And the reality is that sanctuary city policies vary from city to city. There's over 300 municipalities in 13 states that have sanctuary city policies, and they're all different. And so Philadelphia has its own unique policies that are different than the policies from the cities that testified today.
Well, first of all, I did see some of the hearing, and I particularly liked what Michelle Wu, the mayor of Boston, had to say when she was talking to, and I can't remember which legislator was, calling himself, yelling at her. but she said, if you're serious, and I'm paraphrasing, if you're serious about getting rid of crime and making sure that crime stays down, how about passing Medicaid funding? How about giving more funding for education? How about doing these practical things that everyone tells you is what we need and what you would rather not provide in favor of this particular spectacle? I thought that what she did was great. And I was like, I would love to see other mayors, Sherelle Parker, do the same thing. Get up there and say, look, I understand that, you like the spectacle of ICE agents going through the city and you want to look tough, but you wouldn't need to look tough if you actually did your job.
Right. And I think that's what they were calling for. She also said that you should pass gun control measures if you're worried about crime. But they were all united in saying it is your job as Congress to pass immigration reform law. You have not done so. And we are only here to enforce the laws that are on the books, which we are all following. And so if you want us to do something different, you have to pass laws to do that. And some of the legislators admitted that they were struggling with passing comprehensive immigration policy. And of course, with all of the other executive orders and things that are happening, it has been really tough to keep up. So a couple other things that happened this week is that President Trump declared English the official language of the United States. I'm sure that will be challenged as well as many of the other executive orders have been. But if you read the executive order, something that is of note is that it also revokes President Clinton's 2000 executive order, which calls for facilitation of language access in the federal agencies. It's not clear why they revoked that particular order. You would think having language access at federal agencies is something that is valuable, especially since we do have a very diverse populace. And because the U.S. has territories where they do not speak English, such as Puerto Rico, right, where the majority of people are Spanish speaking. So I think, again, that is just another executive order reinforcing, this America First policy. And again, trying to scapegoat and demonize immigrants and people who are not English speaking. Some more things on the list too. City Council passed a resolution this week that was sponsored by Working Families Party member Nicholas O'Rourke, and it calls on Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE, to immediately release Sarath One Van from Moshannon Valley Processing Center, and calls on members of the United States Congress to champion welcoming immigration policies in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and to recognize Philadelphia as a city of second chances, especially for formerly incarcerated non-citizens. And so what we've been finding out in the city of Philadelphia in the last coming weeks, and we've seen this in other parts of the country as well, there's been lots of videos circulating online, is that people who have been incarcerated in the past, who have been convicted of crimes, who have served their time, who have reintegrated into society, who are now paying taxes, who are contributing members, who have an active immigration case, are now being arrested, detained, and being sent for deportation. And so this is what's happening in Philadelphia. There are several people who have been targeted, who, like I said, have already been convicted, have already served their sentences and been released, and now are receiving orders for removal. And I think that's particularly concerning because, these cases are old. And, they seem to believe that they had the opportunity to remain in the United States. And some of these cases are minor. They range anyway from DUI, from possession of drugs, to a simple assault. These aren't cases of murder and rape and violent assault, as some of the narrative would say. I mean, although there are those cases, but some of the people being targeted locally have much smaller offenses. And so this resolution, which is largely symbolic, let's be honest, is meant to draw attention to the people in the community who are being targeted by ICE and being removed. And you saw this also happen in Camden County over the weekend. A family, had a vigil for a couple of Turkish immigrants who own the New Jersey Kebab House in Haddon Township, and their parents were removed. They were both detained. The father was later released, and he has an ankle monitor awaiting his court date. But the mother, who is an older woman, is in North Jersey at a detention center awaiting her court date. The family is devastated by this. And apparently they had come here legally on a visa. Their visa, before it was set to expire, they applied to renew it. And they have been awaiting approval or word on their case in the last years. And this is very common. Many people come here illegally, apply to stay, and immigration doesn't give them an answer. And so they're in this legal limbo. And so while they're awaiting that decision, their status is kind of undetermined. And so it's not clear why ICE targeted this family. Maybe somebody reported them. But they don't have a criminal record and they didn't cross the border illegally. So if anything, they have a civil offense by overstaying their visa. And so I think it's really important for people to understand that when you do cross the border illegally, that is a crime under US federal law. But when you travel here legally and overstay your visa, which is what many, many people do, it is a civil offense. And it's also perfectly legal to come into this country and declare and apply for asylum. That is also not a crime. And so again, it's unclear why this family was targeted. But what's really different is that there were several Camden County legislators at every level, the mayor, county commissioner, state reps, that rallied for this family on Saturday and also called on Congress to pass immigration reform. And I think that's a really big contrast from what you've been seeing in Philadelphia, apart from this resolution that was passed by Nicholas O'Rourke.
Well, the whole immigration reform thing has been an issue since George W. Bush was president, and he couldn't get it solved. And he was a Republican with a Republican majority in Congress at the time. So, and another thing that stood out with this particular story, the last one you were talking about, Vanessa, is that these people applied for their green cards. They still haven't gotten them yet.
So we are well over time here. We're no longer on television or radio. So we want to thank everybody for being with us. Nicholas O'Rourke will be on with us next week. So we'll see you then.